You want to have good mentors in your career, and then you want to pay it forward, and you want to be a good mentor to others.
Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it. Welcome to the Solar Maverick podcast. I'm Benoy, your host of the podcast. I'm excited to have our guest, Steve Schwerd. He's the principal of Schwerd Consulting. Actually, Steve, you're the first time we've actually had a second interview of someone that we've interviewed initially. We had great feedback from your podcast interview, and I'm excited to have you back on the podcast, Steve.
Oh, thanks, Benoy. I'm honored to be your second timer here. I'm excited to do it. I enjoyed the first one. Really didn't know what to expect, it having been my first podcast as well. So, it's comfortable. You've set it up well for everybody, and I've enjoyed listening to all your podcasts since.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're not familiar with Schwerd Consulting, they're dedicated to design, engineering, and support in all areas of solar photovoltaics. Let Schwerd Consulting take the burden off you and bring ease and expertise in all your areas of engineering and design. They focus on solar PV design and engineering, solar consulting, owner's representation, and project management. And Steve actually has over 25 years in consulting engineering work, but he's involved, and probably it's even more than this now, that you've developed and led a full engineering service team that before you started Schwerd Consulting that emerged as the nationalized, recognized engineering leader for solar. But at this point, how many projects have you worked on and how many megawatts over how many states? You think it's...
Yeah, that's a good question.
I know it's a lot more than 300 megawatts now, right?
Right. At Schwerd Consulting, we've probably done close to that 300 megawatts when you tally up the designs we've done, the engineering we've done, and then a lot of the owner representation that we've done. And those could add up, when we've done some big program reviews. But that's in 5 years. So yeah, we're making good headway.
And it's been amazing. Steve started his company approximately 5 years ago, and they've been growing substantially ever since that. Is there anything else that you would like to add about what Schwerd Consulting does or your background specifically? I mean, you've been in solar now for 10 years. You're a dinosaur
that's
in the solar
right.
industry.
I'm a dinosaur, and like we talked about last time, that's why it's such a great industry for people to get into, and young people, because you can be a veteran relative to much of the workforce in short order. But yeah, no, you captured it well. I don't want to bore your listeners. They could always refer back to the first podcast where we really did a deep dive into my background. But I am an electrical engineer by background, and grew into the building industry, and then that mechanical, electrical, plumbing, sustainable design, energy intensive markets, and then that's where the solar came into play in the sustainable design and energy efforts. And I became so passionate about it, I decided to make that a 100% venture.
And just to clarify too, just so that the listeners know, Schwerd Consulting only focuses on solar photovoltaics, right?
That's right, 100%. And we like to say with that, we know solar. There's others out there that do solar. We know solar. And I think one of the advantages, there's a lot of firms out there that will do solar, but it's not really a focus of theirs. They may be focused in the architectural building community. And then you have other engineers that are purely focused on solar that may not have the same experience related to the facilities or the utilities that are obviously a big part of solar construction.
Definitely, and that's a huge differentiator. I've obviously known Steve for a long time. We're friends as well, and we've known each other for now almost 10 years, which is crazy, or 9 years maybe. So time does fly by, and there are very few companies that solely focus on solar. And, Steve really understands all the different aspects of developing and constructing a project and really could add value to clients to help them, move their projects in the right direction. So
thanks, Benoy. And, I've learned from you on financial and development aspects as well.
Definitely. And then Steve was actually on episode 17 of the Solar Maverick podcast. It was called Solar Engineering and Advice for Entrepreneurs Looking to Grow Successfully in the Solar Industry. He mentioned a previous conversation. Actually, Steve was at our first live podcast event that we did. And actually, we came out with the podcast episode. It was on July 30th in Jersey City, New Jersey. It was a very successful event. How solar technology is changing the world. It's actually episode 42 of the Solar Maverick podcast. Suzanne Waters, who co-hosts some episodes with me, she also worked for Reneu Energy, moderated that panel. I was on the panel as well with Steve and Juan Trulio from Strata Solar and Chris Grablitz from PV Pros. And if you haven't listened to that episode, it was a great episode. And Steve talks about how, being in other industries, obviously more traditional industries, you're considered a dinosaur after 30 or 40 years. But in the solar industry, it's only 10 years since it's a new and emerging and fast-growing industry. And there's still plenty of opportunity, as he mentioned, for people who are, young and looking to get into it. It's a great industry to be in. So I appreciate you being at the live podcast event. What was your perception? What did you think of that event, our first live event?
Oh, I really enjoyed it, Benoy, and I trust that it was well received. It certainly felt that way. The setting was great, and I would do that over and over again. Enjoyable in a nice restaurant, bar location along the water. So your attendees and your speakers alike are very relaxed, and it became very conversational as opposed to a typical conference setting. But more than that, I know that the speakers that you just mentioned, you set up, we all have known each other over the years, through projects, through working together, developing, friendships. But what struck me, I didn't even realize until we were on the panel in the middle of it, that you actually put together a cradle to grave panel, if you will, for solar, because it involved, yourself on the financial and the development side. And then you take it to Schwerd Consulting, which will then do the design engineering efforts for it. Juan's company, Strata Solar, will do the construction of it. And then Chris Grablutz with PV Pros, after installation, their company does the operations and maintenance for the life of the PV system. So everybody was able to speak to the different phases of the project, and that's a wise thing.
Yeah, that was planned, and it was great because you got a unique perspective. And I don't think we've ever seen, at least I haven't, and I've been to a lot of solar conference where you have everyone in the development and then, construction, engineering, financing, and O&M in one panel to kind of talk about their perspective. So it's pretty unique.
Right, because typically there will be a panel with a very focused theme and
yes.
discussion. So this goes against that grain and could cover all bases. And, the Q&A sessions were good as well.
Yeah, I was surprised how the Q&A after us speaking in this panel for an hour, we had a half an hour worth of questions. And then even after the event, we were there still. And I know that we all were answering a lot of people's questions. So it was a really successful event. I really appreciate you being a part of it. And you did a great job and provided great perspective. So thank you.
No, thank you, Benoy. Let me know when the next one is.
Yeah, definitely. We've been getting after that.
With or without a panel, I mean.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have obviously a holiday party coming up first week of December. We'll be sending out details in November. We're definitely going to have more panel discussions as well. We were overwhelmed actually with how many people are asking us when the next one is. And definitely we'll have it soon. And obviously, would love to have you attend and be a part of it.
You got it.
And One of the things which with Steve and what was amazing to me was I actually interviewed a former colleague of mine, Dominic Manninelli, episode 30 of the Solar Maverick podcast, and it's called How to Construct a Great Solar Project. He has his own, construction company, and the first line of his podcast was, there are three things that I learned from Steve Schwerd, which then I was blown away by that whole part of it. And I'm sure for you, it must have been surreal hearing about it. Can you go into, basically Dominic asked Steve, was getting Steve's advice about starting a company, and then Steve provided the three things that you have to find with, I guess, people that you're going to do business with. Well, first of all, what did you think when Dominic actually mentioned you in the beginning of the podcast? And can you go over to, tell our listeners, what those three things are? That
Sure.
would be.
Yeah. I mean, first off, that was great. When I was listening to the podcast and didn't even know about it, heard that, I thought it was great because, one thing is mentorship's a good thing, right? So bi-directional. So you want to have good mentors in your career, and then you want to pay it forward, and you want to be a good mentor to others. And Dominic and I worked for many years with Vanguard Energy Partners, who I've been doing business for over 10 years now. And Dominic was heading up their electrical. So our relationship grew to the point where we would talk about business and entrepreneurialism, and when he decided to do his own thing, and he's having success now with Pro Circuit as a leading electrical contractor for solar here in New Jersey. What he discussed was loosely derived from something that somebody in my past had shared with me. That was Len Cubelis, when I had come on to take over engineering operations for a growing architectural firm that got into the architectural and engineering business and was poised to grow significantly, which we did. And right from the start, we had a discussion about the criteria for ownership and partnership. And I had taken that to heart, worked it for myself. And in speaking with Dominic, I said, there's really three things, because Dominic does have a partner. I said, you want three items for a partner in your business. And number one, they have to have proven results in their field. And by that, obviously, depending on what your business is, those results could be different. But it's got to be results that are of a positive quality, a positive operation, satisfied clients. But more than that, it has to be a proven ability to return profits in what you do, right? Because people could be extremely skilled or extremely knowledgeable, and maybe them in that way. But if they cannot translate that into economic gains or into value to a client or a customer, because customers, they don't pay for your skills, they don't pay for your knowledge, they pay for the application of that and the results and value that it gives them. So that's number one. Proven results is a must. The second item is they have to be able to develop business. They have to close on sales. Now, that doesn't mean that you may have multiple partners where one is the primary rainmaker, but they have to have that ability at any given time. Or even if you may be a person that brings potential customers to the table, they have to be able to help you win that and close that. So that's number two. And the third item is they have to be someone you want to have a beer with. Because, when you're starting a business, running a business, be it small or large, and you are tied together as partners, that's a life. They're like family, like a spouse. You need to be able to enjoy their company socially because it can be challenging enough professionally. And then by that same regards, if you want to go have a beer with them, then probably your staff and your clients may likely want to go have a beer with them as well.
Definitely, I think these are huge points that, anyone could use in any type of partnership, not just partner in the business. Dominic's the principal at Pro Circuit Electrical Contracting, and his partner is Josh, who's the president of Pro Circuit Electric Contracting. But I think it's applicable to any sort of partnership. So these are great insights.
Yeah. And like I said, the mentorship is key. So hearing that, it really brought a smile to my face, and it reminded me, a lot in the past. And a key thing is just like one mentor I had, probably the best engineer in this business that I've known. And we're talking going back 20 years ago, early on after I had joined his firm after about 10 years of experience. He had a very unique style that wasn't appropriate for everybody. And he said, take what you like and avoid what you don't like, or even learn from what you don't like. And as simple as that is, it's very telling. Really, you need to create your style. You're not going to have success by mimicking somebody else.
Definitely.
You want to learn from multiple different people and then use that education to basically create your own unique style and beliefs.
I think that's a great point. That I think people are looking for people who are authentic and who are themselves. Mm-hmm. So I think people appreciate it. It's interesting that you mentioned that because I just, as you know, interviewed Michael Kushner, who's the president of Infinity Energy Services.
That's right.
And he was talking about what he learned from working at Sun Edison and Protec, and then how he applied the parts that he thought were great parts of those companies and his style to running his company now, Infinity. And that's as well for me, like from all my past experiences. I was at Solar City Tesla. We met at Vanguard Energy Partners, and that's how I know Dominic Mattinelli. But, from my different work experiences, I've really, tried to learn from them and then take what I thought was the best parts of it. And then also that fits my personality, it's going to be more authentic. So I think that's a great point, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a simple concept, but it's something people need to do. I know for myself, I was part of an engineering firm that sold itself on its very high quality of work standards, the output, with very little focus on the social or business development aspect
Definitely.
of it. And good for them. Great that they could do that. I've witnessed others that are basically just selling, and they've got great business development leaders, but don't have enough of the emphasis on quality of production. For us and for myself, quality and value is first and foremost, but we want everybody involved in the process to be really comfortable. And you've got to have a likability factor regardless of what you do, because at the end of the day, people are going to be having to put their trust and faith in you. And then it goes to the other aspect, and advice I would give to people is don't lose yourself in your business. If you're an entrepreneur, you need to use your opportunity as the entrepreneur to help it enrich and enhance your personal life and your family life, not let the business overwhelm you and lose out on your personal and family life. And in doing so, marry your business and your personal life together. I know that you do that, right?
Definitely.
I mean, like a lot of the times where you're having great success, you're building relationships inside and outside the office. And that's really what you want to do. And then, if you have a spouse, a significant other, make sure they're all in on your business and what you're doing as an entrepreneur, and then bring them into the fold and enjoy that. I mean, for me, it really crosses boundaries because my wife, Jean, she was a accountant, financial analyst by background. So in starting this, getting her involved and from day one, taking over accounting and administration, she's my CFO now. So we really cross over.
Yeah, definitely. These are all great points. And I think a key thing that you mentioned, it's all about clients feeling a personal relationship, a likability to you, and that they feel that you're being honest and transparent. And I think a lot of clients could see that. And then you want things to be scalable as well. So once you build strong relationships, people are going to continue to work with you. Obviously, you're adding value and great service, but that's one of the key things in business. That's really what makes it scalable as well, is the repeat business. I know you mentioned, Vanguard Energy Partners has been a client of yours for a very long time, and it's all about the relationship. So
that's right. And and people in companies ebb and flow too, right? So one thing you don't want to do is say just have a great relationship with the executive, a senior person, owner of one company, and without regards to the rank and file, really they're the ones in the line of fire. You want to treat everybody well, get to develop those relationships, and have the trust from top to bottom of everybody in the organization. And so when people change, at the core, you're still a key team member.
Definitely. That's so key. I even remember when we first met, you were actually in John Garrity's office, and I worked for John Garrity. And, I remember, you were obviously very friendly and, continued our communications. You didn't necessarily have to. You were the outside engineer. And I remember as well, when you would come into the office, you were, talking to everyone, that you knew in the company. So
yeah, and that comes from, like you said, authenticity, right? Yeah. So I enjoy that. And when I get to know people, and I want to do business with people that I like as well, not just, finding a way for them to like me. And now in what I'm doing versus past experiences where, top line gross revenue, and I may have touched on this in the first podcast. When that's a driver, or where you've got these huge, growth targets, you can fall into the trap of doing business with companies or people that, maybe you don't really want to, but you have to, or, changing your style, changing your price structure to accommodate.
Or even your principles.
Yeah, or your principles.
Yes.
Absolutely. And sometimes, maybe it works out. In the long run, I've found it often doesn't work out economically, but beyond that, it may not even work out to a point where you're just, you're really happy in the environment you've created. So now, as a rule of thumb, I typically will only want to work with people that pretty much are on the same professional and what's the right word? I don't want to say social level, but basically that there's a common understanding and trust and strong communication. That's a better word than social.
Yeah, so it's more of a shared values, I think, is a great way to say it. And as you said, it's like all about the relationships. Like, just even look at the panel that we had, right? Suzanne Waters, her and I used to work together at Vanguard Energy Partners. And then she was out of the solar industry, but I knew how great she is to work with and how smart she is. So then I, brought her back. And now obviously she works for Reneu Energy. Obviously we all know you because you were the outside engineer for Vanguard Energy Partners. And then Juan Triol, who's at Strata Solar, he was an estimator at Vanguard Energy Partners. And, we all worked together. And so it's interesting, how I haven't worked at Vanguard in 8 or 9 years, that these relationships, because how close they are still adding value, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's right. And that will happen in all industries and all walks of life.
That is so true. These are all pearls of wisdom from Steve Schwerd.
Oh boy, that's a lot to live up to.
Yeah, it was interesting too. We did this panel discussion, and I thought an interesting point that Steve talked about was actually there are two things that I wanted to talk about. Was panel recycling the big opportunity, and we had a lot of questions too in the Q&A about this. Can you talk about, obviously, solar is still a very new industry. A lot of the panels have only been maybe operational for 10 to 15 years. But obviously there's going to be a time where, it's degraded enough and, you have to do something with the panels. People are wondering what's going to happen and what's the solutions. Can you go more into the recycling of panels? A lot of people found that topic very interesting.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't think it may be a good fresh one because I don't know that you've spoken to this.
We haven't really spoken
in
to
the
it.
podcast. Now, I'm not involved in solar panel recycling, so I'm not. No. What I'm leading up to is I'm not an expert in that, but obviously I know about it. I'm interested in it. I read about it because it is something that's going to be huge up ahead and is not. It's not prevalent now. It's not highly talked about as witnessed by the lack of discussion in your podcast, but it's very important. And since this is a mixture of entrepreneurialism as well as solar, it's one of those things. I tell people, wow, if you can get into recycling, I mean, that has the potential to be a huge industry ahead. And in fact, I was reading something, I can't give the source now, but even something solar business related that said there should be an average 27% growth per year, till 2050 or something like that. So now's a good time to get into that. So to throw out some figures, just to give it a frame of reference, right? By the start of 2018, there was approximately 50 gigawatts of solar installed in the United States. So roughly that might translate to, let's say, 200 million solar panels, probably at least, and maybe 40 to 50 billion tons of solar panels.
Sure.
Now, that 50 gigawatts, right, of total installed solar, we know that every year it has been increasing by leaps and bounds how much is installed. So the majority of that, right, has been installed in the last 5 years. And then really systems of significant, quantity going back, 10, 12 years. With solar panels having a 25-year performance guarantee plus an actual lifespan that's being seen of 30 to 35 years, that means that day of that real significant recycling need is still years away. But because Europe and other parts of the world were so far ahead of the United States in solar, they had to get the solar panel recycling moving forward. So we can learn from them, and a real impetus for the ramp up in the recycling process and plants and companies that are going to be doing it. It will in part need to be driven by regulations or policies, I should say, from on the federal and state levels, and then even incentives. And I think Washington State has put something forth in incentives and policies. California, I've heard that New York is rolling something out as well. So it's definitely starting. But the naysayers like to point to, oh, well, what happens when these solar panels are no good, and that's going to be a real problem, all this waste of solar panels. Well, the good thing is, let's talk about what components of a solar panel is. You have metal, which is basically the typically aluminum frame around the solar module. And specifically, even talking photovoltaics right now, which is the predominance. You have glass that covers the panel. You have plastic that encapsulates the solar cells, and you have the solar cells themselves that are a crystalline silicon. That's the semiconductor. You have a backsheet to it that's a polyvinyl, and you have just the junction box and the wiring. So we are not talking toxic materials. We are not talking about problems for the environment or the process. In fact, testing was done to show and prove that the waste products, let's say, any leaching, et cetera, are well below the toxicity levels mandated by the EPA. So you actually could just throw out a solar panel.
Wow.
And they could, go into landfills. But you don't want to do that. Don't throw away your solar panel. Don't put it in a landfill. The process has shown that basically when taking it apart, breaking it down, doing the recycling, and I'm not going to go into all the details here, not to bore your audience and definitely not to make sure I get it wrong, right? But 95 to 96% are the reported figures of the solar panel that can not only be recycled, but reused in the making of new solar panels. So that goes to just furthering the strong idea of renewable energy, right? So again, let's go back to critics of solar, the anti-solar industry. The manufacturing of solar panels actually has the highest energy use for making of power systems, as I understand it, right? However, that energy payback period from the input energy to produce them in the solar plants versus what it reaps in use is only about 2 to 3 years, right? So that payback period of that real high use to create is just a few years. It can last 25, 35 years, and then 95% of it can be recycled and reused for new solar panels.
Sure.
So
that's amazing. By the way, not a lot of people know this in the industry, so I appreciate you educating our listeners about this important.
Sure, that's what we're here for. Yes. More than me just telling stories, right? And
Pearls of Wisdom by Steve Schwerd.
So that renewable energy only gets enhanced. Now that's, again, we're talking about what you can do. It's not a process that's fully in place. There's a long way to go. I know even SEIA, right? Solar
Energy Industries Association.
Right.
Yes,
so they've developed some program even for members to participate in. They'll be key moving ahead. So there's a lot of work to do. In some areas in Europe, since I mentioned them before, they had mandates that the solar panel manufacturers had to take back the solar panels.
Interesting.
And so that was an impetus to the manufacturers being at the forefront of the recycling industry. So we'll get there with programs and just the pure, when money's going to be available to recycle this growing huge number, that's when it'll take off, right? Because it's supply and demand, and it will happen. It's a good time for people to get into that. Like I said, I also want to use that for another theme. If I could just kind of like devolve, as it popped into my head about the renewable energy and the benefits of that. We talked on the last podcast about how I'm just not that big on the, quote unquote, efficiencies that people harp on in solar, but I talk about the effective,
yes.
Right. The effectiveness. But let's talk about efficiencies of solar panels, thinking along that, that aspect of renewable energy, and also the fact that, there are naysayers out there, because I have heard, so many times about people not in the industry, but skeptical about solar, saying how, it's so inefficient, right? It's not very efficient. The solar panels are inefficient. So let's say a solar panel now is about 20% efficiency rating, right?
Yes.
But what does that mean, right? So often efficiency could be how it converts, right? How it converts to energy. So if you had an input source, like let's say natural gas or something, and only 20% was converted to power, that would be awful. But what the rating of the panel means is its ability to convert the sun's photons
Yes, that's a
into
great point.
usable electricity.
Uh-huh.
So that's 20%. So what happens to the other 80%? Like, are we wasting it? No, it's there every day. The sun's gonna it's
true.
gonna be wasted, if we're not taking that and converting it to electricity, right? So obviously, year over year over year, there's great advances in efficiency of solar panels, which we definitely want. It gets better for the environment, the economics, the ability to have more solar in a smaller footprint, rises with the gains of efficiency. But I mean, I look at it the other way, like, wow, 20%? We could take this free sun
Yes.
and we can get, 20% of it can be used to generate power and energy. It's a great thing. So again,
That's a great point.
that's why, skeptics, and sometimes you hear it out there, they just don't really understand what that efficiency means when you're talking efficiency specific to solar panels.
And I mean,
And that's, that sun is an infinite source. So even when you compare to nuclear energy or biomass or hydropower or geothermal, all of which I'm fine. It's good, advances sustainable design, but those are all finite sources. They're not an infinite source, which, is what renewable energy is all about.
definitely, this is huge. I mean, and the interesting thing to me is that the technology has improved. I remember a time where the capacity or the efficiency was 11 to 12%. Now we're at 20. It's just going to improve over time, especially like with other technologies, with bifacial. And, it's just amazing to see how in the short time the technology is getting more advanced. The panels are also getting smaller with that same,
Right.
with the higher
greater power density.
greater power density.
Yeah.
This goes back to your effectiveness versus efficiency discussion that you spoke about during the first interview that we did. So
Right.
that's really helpful. Is there any trends that you would want to talk about that you're seeing in the solar industry? I mean, this has been an amazing interview. I know I didn't prep you for this question, but I think I would love to get your perspective on, obviously the ITC is going down. This year it's 30%. Investment tax credits going down to 26%. People are safe harboring 5% of panels to qualify for the 30% this year. Are you seeing a lot of activity because people are trying to get their projects through? Are you seeing any sort of rushes to get stuff done, or is it business as usual?
No. Well, I think.
Is there ever business as usual?
Yeah.
Is that the key question? Because I feel like there's always,
Well, the solar industry definitely, since the ITC, whether it be the cash grants or the ITC, traditionally has everybody, scrambling end of the year to get their systems completed online and take advantage of that, of the safe harbor. So, that's kind of become a yearly thing. But yes, with the decrease, I'm seeing our clients have a push on that. And then even more so, since we do a lot of work, right here in New Jersey, with the SREC program closing soon enough, and then a transition to before the new final program, there's a big push there.
Yeah, definitely. So what Steve's talking about is once New Jersey reaches 5.1% in solar, the current state level incentive, which is an SREC, which is a solar renewable energy credit that represents 1 megawatt hour of solar energy, that program will sunset. They're right now going through basically a transition program, meaning that they've are still kind of finalizing what the transition program will be. And then there'll be another incentive. They're planning not to have an SREC program after that, after the transition program. It's going to be more of a fixed incentive. So, everyone is trying to figure out when New Jersey is going to get 5.1%. So you're seeing a lot of people trying to move through the whole process of development and construction and financing as quickly as possible to make sure to qualify for the original SREC incentive. Well, this has been an amazing podcast interview, Steve. I appreciate you being on the podcast a second time and on our live podcast event, How Solar Technology is Changing the World. I think you've added a lot of great personal experiences of, advice that you provided to our listeners, and also talking about two things that I don't think the industry really talks about, and they're misnomers, which is solar recycling, and then also too about efficiencies and how the sun is a limitless resource, that, hey, if we're able to get 20% of something that's limitless that you're not getting, then, that's not an excuse from the solar naysayers. So this is great and unique information.
Well, thanks. I'm glad I could add a little, and to your great work you're doing here for the solar industry. I appreciate the opportunity always to sit down with you and chat, and I look forward to many more events.
Yeah, definitely. And if people wanted to learn more about Schwerd Consulting, what's the best way for them to learn about it?
Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, email admin@schwerdconsulting.com. Our website, simple as that, www.schwerdconsulting.com. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well, you guys are very active on the Schwerd Consulting Facebook page. You guys have a lot of interesting articles about what's going on in the industry and the things that you're working on. So definitely to check out on Facebook, search for Schwerd Consulting, and we'll have all the stuff in the notes as well.
Sounds good, Benoy. I look forward to seeing you and all our friends out in Salt Lake City next week.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. It's always a great way to meet everyone in the industry, and it's always a great time.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. I feel like I could just keep talking to you for hours. So I'll talk about the things that I gleaned from your other podcast that we'll just talk about personally versus here out in Salt Lake.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. Thank you, Steve.
All right. You got it, Benoy.
Thank you so much for listening. If this content is delivering value to you, please go to iTunes and Stitcher Radio and leave us a 5-star review. That helps us build this community, and that's what we're all about right now. Building this community as big as we can to deliver as much value as we can.